So we have spent the last 3 weeks talking about how to make space in your life, specifically in the area of your finances. You know, your finances are one of those things that can feel so overwhelming. It can feel like a trap that you can't get out of, like a hole that the harder and the faster you dig, instead of getting out, you're actually just digging yourself deeper, and it's just this constant feeling of being overwhelmed and not figuring out how to do it. And so we talked about how to create space, initially in your mind, how to think differently when it comes to money, because how you think determines how you feel. And then we talked about creating literal space. A lot of times we collect stuff, and the pull of stuff and the desire to get that next thing that makes us feel good for a short period of time, and how to resist that pull of stuff in your life. And then last week, we started part 1 of 2 of what financial wisdom is, and how to take wisdom, which is the practical and tactical application of knowledge, because we can know something and not apply it. We can know something and maybe apply it, but apply it incorrectly or apply it not tactically. And of course, tactics are taking the entire scenario, everything surrounding it, and figuring out the best path to get through to the other side to actually have victory. That's the idea of tactics. And then, of course, there's practical. Can you actually take it and apply it? I mean, we all know it's great to have $1 million when you hit retirement, right? We all know that, right? How about 2, right? But maybe that's not a practical thing for you to even be thinking about at this point in time. The practical thing for you to be thinking about is, how do I get out of debt? And so you begin to work through those things. And so wisdom is the tactical and practical application of knowledge. And I shared with you last week, and we're just going to share these same verses with you. Proverbs Chapter 16, verse 16. How much better to get wisdom than gold? How much better to get insight than silver? In other words, the writer, who, by the way, is Solomon, who is the wisest, richest man who ever lived, says, listen, I've got both wisdom and riches. And let me tell you, if I had to choose between the two, I would choose wisdom every single time. And the reason that he would choose wisdom every single time is because wisdom actually gives you the ability to make right decisions, to practically and tactically apply the knowledge that you have, which, by the way, if you do it correctly, also determines and actually brings about some wealth in your life, whether it be wealth, financial wealth, or wealth relationally, or wealth health, or all these different things that you can take these truths and apply them to your life, and it actually makes a difference. And so our big idea last week and this week is that wisdom is worth way more than wealth. Wisdom, the ability to practically and tactically apply the knowledge that you have, is worth way more than a fat bank account. Because if you have a fat bank account but a really skinny mind, let's just let that sink in for a minute, that fat bank account's going to go away really, really fast. But if you have wisdom, if you can take knowledge and you can learn how to practically and tactically apply it in every area of your life, then that's going to be long-lasting. That's going to be something that you can take and use in every aspect and every area of your life. The writer of the Proverbs continues. He's Proverbs 4:7. He says, getting wisdom is the most important thing you can do. Getting wisdom, the ability to practically and tactically apply knowledge, it's the most important thing you can do. And he says, whatever else you get insight. So we see wisdom and insight, wisdom and insight, wisdom and insight. And then he even tells us how we actually begin this journey in Proverbs Chapter 9, verse 10. It says, the fear of the Lord. And again, we talked about that last week. If you weren't here last week, I encourage you to jump online. You can listen to it in your car even if you want to. But that's the idea of a healthy respect and an awe of, not like, I'm afraid, but a healthy respect and awe, like a parent or an authority that you respect. And he says, listen, that's the beginning of being able to take knowledge and tactically and practically apply it. He says, then the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. So we see wisdom and insight, wisdom and insight. These things are worth way more than wealth if you learn how to do them. So last week we talked how to actually do this, and one was create the plan, right? You have to actually start. We have to actually start. You have to actually do it. Create the plan. And then we talked about committing the plan, saying, God, my desire is to honor you in everything in my life. And so whatever this financial plan or life plan that I have is, I want to first commit it to you, and then we communicate the plan. If we're married, we talk to our spouse. We have those conversations. We find somebody that's not $180,000 in credit card debt, and we have that conversation with them about, what do you think about this plan? How do you see it laying out? And so we communicate it. And then for all the people who are ADD and love spreadsheets, I really freaked them out because I couldn't come up with another C. So I said execute, which is actually do it. I did have somebody, I'm not going to tell you who they are because I don't want to point them out because I didn't ask, but they came up to me and they go, hey, listen, I didn't write execute because it wasn't a C. I wrote carry out. So there you go. So all you people that are all stressed out about the execute, you can write in carry out for the 4 C's there in doing that. And so we talked about that. This is what you have to do. So today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you the 4 plans, because it's not just one plan. It's literally 4 plans within the big plan, right? Your financial, your life plan. It's all these different parts working together so that you can make space in your life, so that you can actually have financial success. And here's the thing. And we talked about this throughout the series, but I think it's important just to reiterate it one more time. Jesus Christ talked about finances and wealth management and material possessions more than he did heaven and hell combined. And the reason is, at least I believe the reason, we're not given the specific reason, but I believe the reason is because finances has led so many people away from God. And when you move away from God, your relationships get worse. Your ability to process things in a healthy way gets worse. Everything deteriorates because the closer you get to God, the more you move towards that ideal that God intended for you to begin with. Your purpose and your plan, your design, all these different things. And so as you move closer to God, those things come in line. Now, do not hear what I just said and go, oh, when you follow Jesus, your life gets easier. That's not always the truth. I'll be real honest with you. Sometimes when you get really serious about following God and you get really serious about honoring God with your finances, some of the most difficult times in your life are right ahead of you. So you're like, wow, that's so motivating and encouraging. Thank you for sharing that. But here's why, right? Any of you ever thought to yourself, usually it happens around January, I really need to get in shape. Any of you ever thought, don't raise your hands, but don't point either, but I really need to get in shape. And you remember that first time you got up at 5:30 or 6 o'clock to go into workout, right? And your alarm went off, and if you're like me, you're like, shut up, right? But you got up, and you went, and it was hard working out the first time, and it wasn't easy the second time. In fact, the second time was even more difficult. The first time is usually easier than the second time because the first time you haven't done anything physical in like 17 years, so you're not in pain. The next morning, you hurt in areas you didn't think you had muscles. And see, that's what happens. When you say, hey, I'm going to do something new, you're going to have resistance. It's a natural thing. So I do not want you to walk out of here after these 4 weeks or walk out of here tonight after we do the More Than Money workshop and think, everything's going to be easy. I've got the plan. It's going to be. No, you're going to get some of the most significant resistance. But here's the thing. Resistance builds strength. And you will be stronger because of it. And because you are stronger, you will be able to accomplish more things. Okay? So don't freak out when things get tough, because they're going to get tough. In every area in your life, it's going to get tough. But if you stick with it, if you stick to the plan, if you continue to execute the plan, then you are just going to get stronger. So this morning, let's kind of go through the big picture, okay? And then tonight we're going to actually go into a little bit more detail with all these specific plans. But I want to give you the big picture. There are 4 plans. So living in financial wisdom means having a plan to work, and here's a word you don't hear much anymore, vigorously. Having a plan to work vigorously. Now, vigorously is a really cool word because when you hear the word vigorously, man, all sorts of images start popping in your head. It's not like a word that you go, okay. No, I mean, like you're thinking of something like somebody like working out, somebody doing something. They're digging a hole. They're putting every bit of energy and effort, and they're sweating it out there. That's how God intends for you to work. That doesn't mean like, well, I'm an accountant, so I'm going to turn the air up to like 84 degrees and sit here and sweat because I'm supposed to work vigorously. No, it's about the attitude behind it. We talked about it a few weeks ago, but the attitude behind work oftentimes is it's this necessary evil and we're just going to do it. But the reality is that if you are going to have this financial plan, which is really bigger than a financial plan, it's a life plan, if you're going to actually do that, you have to work with an intentionality. You have to work with vigor, with energy, with excitement, with enthusiasm. And as we talked about, if you don't have that, then you need to start creating a plan so that you can either have that in the current job, or you need to find a job that actually allows you to express yourself and do it that way, because that's God's intention for you. Work is not a four-letter word. It's something that God created before the fall. It's something that's a part of your life that God is going to use to make you into the man or the woman that He's called you to be. So let's look at a couple verses here. Proverbs 14:23. All hard work brings what? Now we hear profit and we think what? Cha-ching, money, money. That's not what it means. It can mean that, right? But it's talking about all hard work actually produces something in your life. Regardless of what it is, if you are willing to work hard at something, it will produce a benefit of some kind for you in your life. But notice, it's what kind of work? Hard work. It's hard work, because hard work means you're working hard. Wow, that was profound, wasn't it? You're actually working vigorously. You're actually trying. You're putting your energy and your effort. And I don't want you to raise your hands, but I'm going to ask you a really honest question. If you look back Monday through Friday, or Sunday through Friday, or Tuesday through Saturday, or whatever your work week is, can you honestly say, this last week, you worked vigorously? That if somebody looked at your work schedule this last week, that they would go, wow, they are a vigorous worker. Honestly, a lot of us, we do just enough to get by. Now, here's the thing. It says all hard work brings a profit. If you only do enough to get by, it doesn't begin to give you the benefits that it potentially could give. And then he ends with this. He goes, but mere talk leads to poverty. Now, I don't remember what the exact statistic is. I should have written it down. But it was in the double digits. And it's the amount of productivity, percentage-wise, that is lost in the workplace because of right? Some of you are like, oh, you just hurt my feelings. I don't. Okay. But that's the truth. He literally says, mere talk leads to what? Poverty. No benefit whatsoever. Talking about it does absolutely nothing. He's like, get to work. Work hard. Proverbs Chapter 12, verse 11. Whoever works his land will have plenty of bread. Now, I don't know about you. I don't have any bread fields. The whole point behind it is that if you work your job, you do your thing, you work it hard, you're going to actually be able to eat. And he says, but he who follows worthless pursuits lacks sense. If you follow things, all these get-rich-quick schemes, right? All you got to do is work an hour a day. That's all you got to do. Work an hour a day, and you can make $10,000 a week. Yeah, and here's how that works. You create a plan that says, if you learn how to do my system, you can work an hour a day and get $10,000 a week and get 10,000 people to buy that system. That's how you get 1 hour a day and get 10,000. That's how it works, because the reality is it's not going to work. And here's the thing that's interesting, too. It's not just hard work, it's actually a hunger to work, a passion to work. Now, again, I'm always honest with y'all. I'm going to be real honest with you. I was just sharing with a couple this morning. We were talking about how difficult it is sometimes to get up in the morning, especially when it's like 66 degrees outside, it's nice and cool, and you get your first cup of coffee, and you're like, oh, sitting on the deck. We have a wonderful deck. I can sit down and look at the woods and everything. And listen, if I were not the pastor, I think I'd be there this morning. I'm going to be honest with you, because, man, it's just like mornings like this, I just want to like sit and just chill, right? Anybody with me? Anyone they're like, that's awesome. Congratulate yourself for being here this morning, because you did the better thing, and I appreciate that. But there used to be a hunger. How many times have you woken up in the morning and you woke up and you're like, whoo, I'm ready for work? All right? A couple of you are like, yeah. Most of us are like, Listen to what this says, Proverbs 18:26. I love this. A worker's appetite or his hunger It works for him because his hunger urges him on. Now, he's literally talking about hunger, like actually, because he's like, you need to eat, so you need to work. But if we put it in our sense, in our world today, it literally is saying, listen, do you have a passion, a burning desire, a hunger to do the absolute best that you can at the job that you have? And if that's not what's percolating inside of you, then you need an attitude check. Because our plan, if we're going to actually have the life plan that God has for us, it begins with a plan to work vigorously and enjoy that. So work vigorously. Second one is this, and that is a plan to spend wisely. A plan to spend wisely. So we've got a plan to work vigorously. And if that means, doing it at your current job and doing that, that's great. If that means you need to figure out a side hustle, listen, if you need to figure out a side hustle, you're like, listen, I need to have some multiple streams of income, that's cool. I encourage you to do it. I really think, I think and I believe that God is the inventor. He's the creator of the entrepreneurial spirit. So I believe that God has put that inside of some of you. So some of you are like, man, I need to start a business like every 2 years. Go for it. Do it. I think ground zero. Friendship should be ground zero for all these entrepreneurial stuff. Go for it. Have fun. Have 14 different jobs as long as you have it balanced. And dude, that's great. Wonderful. But here's the thing. What if you do all that and you're making all this money and your bank account is just growing and you've balanced your relationship well, and so your kids actually know your name and your wife actually likes spending time with you and all that type of thing. And then you spend money, you spend money like a professional athlete. What happens? All that hard work is gone. It's wasted. So once you have this plan to work vigorously and get this stuff rolling, then you've got to actually have a plan to spend it wisely. Proverbs Chapter 21, we're going to read verse 17, and then I'm going to say a few things, then we'll read verse 20. Those who love pleasure become poor. Those who love wine and luxury will never be rich. Now, just put your finger there. Don't keep reading. Go on, talk about it for a second. When I say a plan for your spending and spending wisely, what word pops into your head? Budget. Say it with me. Do you feel dirty? So you got to have a plan to work vigorously, but then you also have a plan to spend wisely. You have to create a budget. Now, the minute that you hear the word budget, you think cheap. You think, I'm going to be shopping on the clearance aisle in Kroger. All the stuff that it's going to expire tomorrow. I'm going to buy macaroni and cheese that tastes like cardboard for my kids. Listen, this is just the way that it's going to be. And Dave Ramsey's like beans and rice and beans. That's what. And now, is there a time for that? The answer is yes. If you have gotten yourself in such a financial mess that you need to do that for a short period of time to be able to get yourself out of the hole, that's necessary. But here's the problem. Whenever you hear budget, do you think quality? No. In fact, if you rent a car from Budget Rent-A-Car, you know it's not quality. You're like, it's probably going to have some cigarette holes in it, and it may not have a spare tire. It may be a little lumpy when I go over stuff. You don't think about that. If you think about, listen, I've got a budget Rolex for you. It was made in Chinatown, and it's got Japanese movement or something like that, all sorts of weird stuff, because you don't think quality. But here's the thing. Budget has nothing to do with quality. It has nothing to do with quality. Budget is simply a roadmap for your finances. That's all it is. It's just telling your finances where to go. And there are certain times that your financial plan to spend wisely means you restrict a lot of extra spending. And that's what this verse 17, is saying. He's saying, listen, if at the beginning of all these things, you're all into the pleasurable stuff and the rich and stuff, and you're like, hey, I'm not just going to buy the Kraft macaroni and cheese. I'm going to buy the shells with the Velveeta and all this stuff. And, it's going to be great. It's, literally, how funny is that macaroni and cheese is something we think is quality. But anyways, so you do all that stuff, then guess what? If you do that on the front end, you will never be able to enjoy verse 20. Listen to what verse 20 says. The wise have wealth and what? You see, that's why these verses are next to each other. In verse 17, he says, listen, if you run out and you're in love with all the bestest of stuff, and you have to, listen, you can't wear any sneakers that cost less than $150, and you just got to do this. And I buy all my clothes at Costco and Sam's Club, pretty much. That's really the way it is. And you know what? It lasts, and it works, and it's fantastic, and it's great. Some of you just lost a ton of respect for me. That's fine, whatever. But that's the reality. Why? Because I'm not going to spend $1,000 for a pair of sneakers. That's stupid. It just is. And if you spent $1,000 on a pair of sneakers, let's talk afterwards, okay? We'll just have a conversation because we need to talk about that. But here's the thing. If you do this part, if you don't fall in love with that and you take care of your finances well, then verse 20 can become reality in your life because you've handled your finances well. And then in the things that really matter, you have the money to be able to do that. You have the money to enjoy those things because you've actually created a plan to spend wisely. There's nothing wrong with having good stuff. There's nothing wrong with having nice stuff. There's nothing wrong with having luxurious stuff. Unless it messes you up to where you can't follow Jesus the way He's called you to. Unless you are so in love with that stuff that you're unwilling to tell your money where it needs to go so that you can do the stuff that really matters in life. So, if you're going to follow financial wisdom, you need to have a plan to work vigorously, a plan to spend wisely. Number 3, a plan to save diligently. A plan to save diligently. Some of you are like, yeah, saving. How many of you are natural spenders? Just real quick, just raise your hand. Natural spenders. Okay, cool. Now, how many of you are natural savers? Cool. Notice how it's interesting. Often the savers are married to the spenders. So here's the thing. I'm going to just talk to the spenders for a moment because I tend to lean more towards that part. I'm about 50-50, but I know the joy of like going out and buying something, right? Because there's a joy there, right? Especially if you can get a deal, right? Like, listen, I just have to tell you, I know that we really didn't have the money for this, but I went in and it was two, and if I bought two, I would get the second one for like $50. So I got two of them for like $150. So literally, I saved $50. No. You spend $150. That's the real equation here, okay? And here's the thing that feels good. We get excited about that. And I want to tell you, savers feel the same way. When they put this squirrel some money away, they're like, oh, I just saved $50. They put it over there. Because we're wired differently. There's not one that's right. There's not one that's wrong. But here's the thing. You got to work together. You got to come up with a plan to spend wisely and a plan to save wisely. Now, this is interesting because this statistic came pre-COVID, and I want to give this to you. In Forbes magazine, I think it was 2018, said that 63% of American families have less than $500 in savings. 63% of American families have less than $500 in savings. Do you think that's gotten better or worse over the last couple of years? This means that they have less than $500 set aside when, not if, when an emergency arises. So what happens is that when that emergency rises, they don't have the money to be able to cover it, so then they go into debt to cover it. But they haven't had a plan to even save any money to begin with, so they can only make minimum payments on the card, which means they continue to accrue the 27% interest every single month. And then guess what? When that happens, another emergency is on its way. And that's how people get behind and further behind and further behind and further behind. So you have to come up with a plan to save. This is one of the biggest things that Dave Ramsey teaches in FPU. He calls it the emergency fund. He says the very first thing you should do, the very first baby step, is get $1,000 in your emergency fund so that you can cover most of anything that takes place, at least smaller emergencies, so that you can actually get out of that, so that you can actually do it. He calls it Murphy's Law insurance because bad stuff's going to happen. So you might as well have it there ready to go. And so if you've never taken Financial Peace University before, I really encourage you to do that. I highly encourage you to join it. It starts on September 11th. We've already told you about that, so I won't belabor that. But there are 3 reasons that you save, okay? Reason number 1, you save for what you know is coming. This isn't on your notes. This is freebie stuff. The verses are on your notes. But these are, you save for what you know is coming, right? So you know stuff is coming. Let me just share this with you. If you have children, they're going to need stuff. I know that may be a shock for some of you. Some of you that maybe your baby's like 6 months old, and you're like, well, no, Grandma and Grandpa, the baby showers just covered everything. It's just fantastic. They're going to need stuff, and if you have boys, they're going to need like 7 different pairs of sneakers every single year because they're just going to destroy them or grow out of them. It's just reality. And if you're not planning for that, guess what? You're going to spend money that you don't have to be able to do this. So you have to plan for what you know is coming. Proverbs Chapter 6, verses 6 through 8. Take a lesson from the ants, you lazy bones. Learn from their ways and become wise. Though they have no prince or governor or ruler to make them work, they labor hard all summer, gathering food for the winter. They know the winter is coming, so they're setting stuff aside. You plan for, you save for what you know is coming in some way, shape, or form. Even if you don't think your kid is bright enough to go to college, you may want to think about saving money for them to go to college. Or if you have children that you think maybe someday someone might like them enough to actually marry them, you might want to set some money aside to actually have money for their wedding. You go, well, we only have boys. Well, you know what? Okay, anyways. Okay, so the second thing is save for what you don't know is coming. Let me just, real quickly, show of hands. Anyone ever experienced something that was bad in your life that you didn't know was coming? Anyone? Okay, so that'd be all of us. Okay. So you have to save for things that you don't know are coming. You're unaware that it's going to happen. You know something's going to happen at some point in time, but you don't know what it is. So you save for that ahead of time. Proverbs 27:12. A prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions. A prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions. You prepare yourself for those things. And the simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. So you save for what you don't know is coming. Then third, you save for when you're gone. I hate to break this to you. I know for some of you it will be a huge shock. But you're all going to die. I know. In fact, do me a favor, look at your spouse, and with just a smile on your face, say, you're going to die. Like, maybe not today, but you're going to die, right? Now, let me ask you a question. Are you prepared for that? You're like, well, I'm going to be gone. I understand that. But are you prepared for that? So, have you saved for when you're gone? Or maybe you won't be gone. Maybe you just won't be able to work. Have you saved for that? Proverbs chapter 13, verse 22, I love this. A good person leaves an inheritance for their children's children. But a sinner's wealth is stored up for the righteous. So a plan to work vigorously, a plan to spend wisely, a plan to save diligently, and the fourth and final part of this is a plan to give generously. A plan to give generously. Now, this is, whenever we get in this financial topic, people always get really squirrely, okay? I didn't sit down and go through all the giving and go, okay, now which area am I going to look at this morning? No. Because that's not the point. In fact, what we're going to talk about has absolutely zero to do with Friendship Church. It has zero to do with budget. It has zero to do with anything. This is all about your relationship with God. That's what this is about, okay? And God actually desires for this to be a part of your life plan. Listen to this. Proverbs chapter 21, verse 26. Some people are always greedy for more, but the godly love to what? God literally says, if you are going to have a life plan, a financial plan that is really backed, undergirded, committed, sponsored, blessed, pushed forward by me, it has to include this plan to be a generous giver. It has to. Otherwise, you're missing out on it because a godly person loves to give. Now, here's the thing I want to be really clear about. I'm not talking about amounts. I'm talking about attitude. In fact, even if you take what would be considered kind of the old school version of tithe, right? A tithe is 10% of what you make. If you make $100,000, the amount that you give, even if you give a tenth of what you have, is going to be more than the person that makes half of that. So we're not talking about amounts. We're talking about the attitude. We're talking about the heart of generosity that God desires all of us to have. And it's not just limited to your finances. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 9 through 10. God says these words, or Solomon says these words. God says these words through Solomon. My apologies. Honor the Lord with your wealth and with the best part of everything you produce. Then he will fill your barns with grain, and your vats will overflow with good wine. Anybody have wine vats in their garage or their basement? Anybody? Because if you did, we need to be friends. I love that. I like wine vats. Like even vat itself sounds like, huge, massive, right? What is God saying here? Okay? He's not specifically talking about grain. He's not specifically talking about wine vats. What he's saying is that I am making a promise to you. God is saying to each and every one of you, listen, I want you to listen very carefully. If you honor me with what I have blessed you with, then you will always have enough for what you need and then more than enough to actually share with other people. Now, that's not socialism. That's you being able to give to other people and other needs and other different things like that as God moves you in doing that. But the whole point is it all starts with first you honoring God. You putting God first place in your life and in your finances. He even instructs us as to how we're supposed to give. He uses the phrasing, the best part. In other places it says the first fruit. In other places it says the very first thing that you do. And so as we boil that all down, we say, okay, what does God want us to honor Him with? God wants us to honor Him with the first and the best of what we have. The reason that we do that, the word honor means, And so the reason that we do that is not because there's some guilt thing. In fact, in the book of Corinthians, Paul says, listen, don't give out of guilt. Give because you see what God has done for you. You see what God has blessed you with. And then you go, God, because of all you've done for me, I am giving you my first and my best. And God goes, when you do that, I'm going to bless you with everything that you need. And by the way, I hate the fact that I have to say this, but there's so many, especially if you watch late night TV like I do. You stumble across a preacher who's got slick back hair and his wife's got more makeup on than anyone should have. And they begin to talk about how if you give $1 to God, God's obligated to give you 10. That is a lie. That is a lie from the pit of hell. That is not the way that, God is not a magical ATM machine. That is not the way this works. In fact, sometimes, let me ask you a question. Would you rather have $10 million in the bank, no one that loves you, no one that wants to be around you, cancer that's eating you from the inside out, your kids absolutely hate you, your spouse left you a long time ago, or enough money to get by, a spouse that loves you, kids that love you and honor God, and good health? Now, if you're like, well, I don't know, $10 million. God says that He will honor us and bless us. It doesn't always have to be financial. In fact, the greatest blessings of God don't have dollar signs. They don't. So the whole point here is God going, listen, I want you in the area that I have highlighted in Scripture as one of the most important areas, one of the areas that trip most people up. I want you to honor me with your first and with your best. Tracy and I, years and years ago, when we started we have Chase, and so we have an automatic thing go out. Literally on the 15th, we get paid on the 15th, unless the 15th falls on a Saturday, that's the 14th. But you get the point. On the 15th, the very first thing that leaves our bank account is what we give to Friends of Church. Very first thing. It's not even, literally, if I go on my bank account, it's gone before, it hits and it's gone. And there's an intentionality behind that. The reason that we do that is, number one, because we don't want to forget, because it's that important. And we believe absolutely we have been blessed beyond measure because we've been doing that for the almost 30 years we've been married. It's just, we believe that. There's also another reason that we do that. We do that because if we do it back here, guess what happens? Money tends to disappear. And so we don't give of the leftovers, we don't give the seconds, we don't give, if there's money left in the bank, we don't give after all the bills are paid. It is the very first thing that we do because it's showing that we actually trust God to take care of all this. So I'm not saying that look at us, send Dave an email telling you, no. I'm telling you that because I want you to know it's not just something we talk about, it's something we practice. And we have experienced the benefits of it. It is because God actually wants that for you. So that's the thing. God says, I want your first and your best. So my challenge to you would be, as you begin to make these financial plans, begin with a thought process. What do we want to honor God with first? Start there. What do we want to honor God with first? Before you buy that new release, that new pair of shoes, grab that cup of coffee, do it first. The question whenever I talk about this is, how can giving some of your money away be a wise financial move? That seems counterintuitive. Can we all agree to that? I'm honest. Don't be like, I'm way too spiritual. No. That seems really counterintuitive, doesn't it? But giving back to God does something beyond just the financial thing. Giving back to God says, God, I believe and I trust in you. I believe that you can take care of all of the rest. But as we've talked about this series, giving back to God first actually reminds us of everything we've learned so far in this series. Listen, here we go. That everything we have is in fact God's to begin with. Everything we have is God's to begin with. So God, I honor you with the first and best because you have blessed me with this, therefore I give back to you. That when we remember that we are only stewards of the resources that God has given to us, it means that it's less, that we stress less, we think differently about the money that we have because it's not ours, it's God's that we are simply stewards of. And God has said we do this, so we do that. It fills us with a sense of well-being, and that sense of well-being lasts longer and brings more joy than the thrill of purchasing the newest and the shiniest and the prettiest thing, and actually can help us resist from the pull of more. Giving forces us to actually plan ahead and causes us to use wisdom and always trust that God is working out on our behalf as we follow His plan for our lives. The biblical wisdom of making a plan, saving, and putting God first by giving back puts us into a healthy cycle for our minds and our possessions and our relationships and our jobs and our money. Because giving to God first is ultimately about whether or not you actually trust God. That's what it all boils down to. Do you actually believe God will do what He says, what He's promised He's going to do? When it comes to your money, it's always about trust. If you go to set up a retirement fund and your retirement specialist is working in a strip mall and all of his lights are out and he's got a computer from 1984, you're probably not going, well, this guy knows what he's doing. You don't trust him. So who are you going to trust? Are you going to trust your ideas or God's wisdom? Are you going to trust God's power to bless you or your plans and your schemes? Are you going to trust your ability to provide for you and your family and their needs, or are you going to trust in God's supernatural capabilities to unleash every blessing in your life so that you can live in freedom, so that you can replace the cramped feelings of never having enough with the expansive possibilities of God's limitlessness? You see, that's what making space is all about. It's not about having these huge margins in your bank account. It's about being able to live life the way God intended you to live it on day one. So my challenge to you is to not just walk out of here and go, oh, that was nice, or I hated that, whichever one, but actually take what we've talked about. Have a conversation. If you're married, have a conversation with your spouse and begin to put these things into practice so that you can experience the freedom and the space that God wants to create in your life. Father God, we thank you.